New York's mayoral election is developing the same way as Toronto's most recent mayoral election. This has happened before. It looks like what we are seeing is a trend in major North American cities. And as science would recommend, if it's a trend, the sooner you notice it, the sooner you can learn from it and use it to predict the future and make good decisions. On top of that, new polling on the mayoral election reveals some interesting insight on a debate about how Americans view socialism and capitalism. So let's get into all of that. We have an article from the New York Post. Zoran Mamdani most popular with foreign-born New Yorkers, but Cuomo favored with homegrown voters, according to this poll. Scrolling down, the article continues, Democratic mayoral frontrunner Zoran Mamdani has a commanding lead with foreign-born New Yorkers, while Big Apple residents who are American-born are more likely to vote for former Governor Cuomo, according to a new poll. The Patriot polling survey found that Mamdani has a whooping 62% of the foreign-born vote, while Cuomo nets 24%, and Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa has a 12%. Cuomo, running as an independent, has a healthy lead amongst American-born New Yorkers, securing 40%, compared to Mamdani's 32% and Sliwa's 25%. So, local-born New Yorkers tend to prefer Cuomo, whereas foreign-born New Yorkers tend to prefer Mamdani. And when we say tend to prefer, it's not a slight preference, it is a huge preference. 62% is much bigger than 24%, and 40% is much bigger than 32%. But, that said, 62% is still a lot bigger than 40%. So although foreign-born New Yorkers clearly prefer Mamdani and local-born New Yorkers clearly prefer Cuomo, the preference for Mamdani among foreign-born New Yorkers is stronger than the preference for Cuomo among the local-born New Yorkers. And what does that translate into is the overall trend that we see, which is the results still show Mamdani at the top of the pack with general voting population, with the Democratic Socialist nabbing 43% of the overall vote, Cuomo trailing behind by 9%. Sliwa sits at a distant third with 19% of the vote. Now, let's do the math here. If Mamdani has 43% and Cuomo is trailing by 9, 43 minus 9 is 34. So Cuomo has 34% of the vote, while Sliwa sits at 19%. Now what's 34 plus 19? 53. So 53% of voters are voting against Mamdani, but because it's split among two candidates, the centrist candidate and the right-wing candidate, then the socialist candidate ends up winning with a minority of the vote. Now, where have we seen this before? Toronto's most recent election in June 2023. You had the winner, Olivia Chow. Now, not officially a socialist, she is affiliated with Canada's NDP party. That's called the New Democratic Party, which is like Canada's version of the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. And Olivia Chow is affiliated with that party. She won 37% of the vote, and that was enough to win the election. Her main centrist opponent, Anna Bailão, won about 32% of the vote, and Mark Saunders, the right-wing candidate, won approximately 8.5% of the vote. Now, if you take 32.46 and add 8.59, you get approximately 41% of the vote, which would have defeated Olivia Chow. So you see the same story unfolded. The socialist-ish candidate won, even though most voters were against them. But that vote was split between the centrist and the right-winger. So this has happened before. Now, why is that relevant to the story in New York? Well, whichever way the election goes, somebody is going to lose. And they are going to think, what did we do wrong? What could we have done differently? And what can be done in future upcoming elections? And knowing what has happened in the past is supposed to be used to try and predict how things would unfold in the future to better prepare for the future. And Toronto's example shows that. Not only does it show how the election ended up going, which helps predict how New York's election could end up going, but this election happened about 2 years ago. And so it shows what happens after the election. What could people expect after the election? Toronto could also be an indicator of that. Now, what is it about this polling about socialism and capitalism? Well, for that, we go back to the information right here. We have foreign-born New Yorkers tend to be more in favor of the socialist candidate, whereas local-born New Yorkers tend to be more in favor for the non-socialist candidate, or the more popular non-socialist candidate. Now, this poll is not about socialism, but because of Mamdani's socialist affiliations, it has been a major topic when discussing this mayoral election. So it is indirectly a poll that indicates something about America's views of socialism, because those who support Mamdani, well, either they're in favor of socialism or they don't mind his socialist affiliations. Now, there are two opposing views about how Americans view socialism versus capitalism. One view is that America is the leader of the capitalist world and has been for many decades. Capitalism is a part of American culture, and so those who are more assimilated into American culture would tend to be more pro-capitalist than those who are not as assimilated into American culture. This would imply that local-born Americans would be more pro-capitalist than foreign-born Americans. Now, the contrary view is that because local-born Americans have never lived under socialism, they don't really know what it is. They've just read about it in books, maybe seen it in movies. Whereas foreign-born Americans, many of them have come to the United States in order to escape socialism. And so they would be more likely to have a negative view of socialism. And so you would actually expect foreign-born Americans to be more pro-capitalist and anti-socialist than local-born Americans. So you have these opposing views. And what the poll shows is actually the first view is more correct. You have the local-born Americans tend to be more against the socialist candidate, whereas the foreign-born Americans tend to be more in favor of the socialist candidate. So either they are pro-socialist or they're not concerned enough about socialism for them to mind Mamdani's socialist affiliations. Now, New York is not all of the United States and certainly not all of North America. There are many different places on the continent, but these polling results do shed interesting light on this debate, indicating that at least in New York, the foreign-born population tends to be more comfortable with socialist ideas than the local-born population. And we'll see how this mayoral race continues and if it will continue to follow in Toronto's footsteps as it has been. So I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time.